A senior Israeli official firing back at the U.S. after its intelligence report warned the Israeli prime minister's government, quote, may be in jeopardy. The war between Israel and Hamas, which began when the terror group attacked Israel on October 7th, is now on day 159 with no ceasefire or hostage release deal expected anytime soon. In a statement to the Times of Israel, that official accused the U.S. of trying to oust Prime Minister Netanyahu, saying, quote, those who elect the Prime Minister of Israel are the citizens of Israel and no one else, adding, quote, Israel is not a protectorate of the U.S., but an independent and democratic country whose citizens are the ones who elect the government. We expect our friends to act to overthrow the terror regime of Hamas, not the elected government in Israel. Aryeh Lightstone served as senior advisor to U.S. Ambassador to Israel David Friedman during the Trump administration. He joins us now live to discuss all of this. Good morning, and thank you so much for taking the time to be here with us today.
Good morning, Josh. Nice to see you again.
All right, so I do want to get your initial thoughts here as we have this senior official in the Israeli government there providing this statement. We know there's been the comments by President Biden against Netanyahu. Netanyahu responded. I just want to get your overall take on all of this.
Well, play the game. Who would you say this about if it was not about Israel? Meaning, have you ever seen the Biden administration condemn Zelensky? Have you seen the Biden administration interfere in United Kingdom politics? Have we seen them interfere in French politics? And the answer is they have not. And then if you look at the opposite of that, have we seen them make these comments about Hamas or the Palestinian Authority or any of the other autocratic regimes that exist in the Middle East? And then you have to ask, whose side is the United States of America on? Our democratic ally Israel or the terror raping and beheading regime Hamas? And if it's not clear, the president is doing a bad job. And I'm here to tell you, the president is doing a bad job.
Do you feel that there's any sort of shift, any sort of division between the U.S. and Israel now? Because right after October 7th, we know, the connection was there. There were a lot of comments that showed that the U.S. stood with Israel. Has anything changed over the past several months?
Well, it really changed on President Biden's visit, which was highly touted and was much appreciated. He showed up during the war, and he should be recognized for that. He sent aircraft carriers, and he should be recognized for that. But something that wasn't reported on was the PA, the Palestinian Authority, Egypt and Jordan, refused to meet with him when he landed in Israel based upon that fake news story that spoke about Israel blowing up a hospital. Turns out the hospital wasn't blown up, and it wasn't Israel. But on that pretense, Jordan, Egypt, and the Palestinian Authority refused to meet with President Biden. And at that point in time, President Biden didn't slam his fist on the table and say, I am the president of the United States of America and the leader with the free will. If I call you to a meeting, you will show up. And when that did not happen, it evidenced enormous weakness. And all you've seen since that moment is continued weakness, because once President Biden decided that he couldn't get that group on his side, he was going to push Israel as far as humanly possible. And these calls for ceasefire, these calls for building a pier for Gaza, who's going to drive the trucks after they get off the pier, has just been a complete and total distancing of U.S. support for the state of Israel.
Do you think there's ever a time where the U.S. will actually have troops on the ground there in Gaza as the war does continue?
Ironically enough, under President Biden, that is certainly possible for reasons that make no sense. Israel has not asked for troops. Israel will not ask for troops. But essentially, in order to further complicate a complex military zone, President Biden may very well put U.S. troops on the ground, not to defeat Hamas and not to bring back American hostages who are still there, but rather to be able to stop our ally Israel of finishing the job of defeating this murderous regime, Hamas.
The last time I spoke with you, it was right after October 7th. You were speaking to me from essentially a bomb shelter at that point. What have the last several months been like in Israel since October 7th?
So, broad question. I can paint it with some strokes. Number one is, I think across the free world, there's been a concern about kids 18 to 35, that they live their lives like this and measure friends based upon, Instagram and likes based upon, a little heart on the screen. And if you look at the 18 to 40-year-olds in this country, my goodness, do you have a positive outlook on what the future looks like? Because they have sacrificed literally everything for the sake of their country and for the sake of their future. And what they've dedicated has been so enormous. The morale here is if you can be 105 out of 100, you would be at 105 out of 100, because from an Israeli perspective, there is no more moral or more just war than this one. And people are willing to do anything in order to ensure that Israel gets to that victory. At the same time, there's meaningful concern about the north. Just in this week, only on Wednesday, there have been over 250 rockets fired by Hezbollah at Israel in the north. That is simmering into what could turn into a second front of a meaningful and frankly nerve-wracking war, especially when you don't know where the United States of America is going to fall out in this particular battle.
When it comes to a possible ceasefire, there's, of course, the discussion of the importance of the release of the hostages. But specifically when it comes to a possible ceasefire, what are the thoughts from people within Israel?
Every single person in Israel is walking with two hearts. Heart number one says the number one priority is to bring the hostages home. That is the moral obligation of the state of Israel. And heart number two says it is the moral obligation of the state of Israel to make sure that Hamas cannot perpetrate this attack ever again. Now, those two do not walk parallel. They intersect, because Hamas knows that the only leverage that they have left in the world is the hostages, and they will hold on to them as best as humanly possible. It has been one of their arguments that they will not release the last hostage until they know that there is not a temporary ceasefire, but a permanent ceasefire and the evacuation of all Israeli troops from the Gaza area. I don't know how a government of Israel will be able to function and tell its people that we are protecting you, meaning the state of Israel is protecting the people of Israel, unless it finishes the job and eliminates Hamas from all of Gaza. Because if they don't finish the job and they don't eliminate Hamas from all of Gaza, whether it's 1 week later or 1 year later or 2 years later, this same thing will happen again. And it's reprehensible and tragic enough that it happened one time. A second time would be of epic proportions.
I want to talk a little bit more about Hezbollah. We were just discussing that over in northern Israel, as we know that, about 24 hours ago, you had more than 100 rockets that were fired from Lebanon at northern Israel. Is Israel concerned about the threat that is posed there by Hezbollah?
Yeah, of course they are. Hezbollah is a much more meaningful fighting force than Hamas, which is not to diminish Hamas's capabilities as a fighting force. They are powerful. Hezbollah is more powerful. The question is, and I'm old enough to remember roughly 14 months ago, where Amos Hochstein, the representative of the United States of America, said, well, we've conducted a treaty in between Lebanon and Israel on this maritime barrier. There won't be any more wars up there because they both have things to lose. The naivete of what the region is like is just paralyzing in terms of its ability. You can only win in the Middle East if you're strong and if you have deterrence. Israel must restore its deterrence, and Israel must assure both its allies as well as terrify its enemies that it is strong enough to defend itself by itself.
All right. Aryeh Lightstone, senior advisor to U.S. Ambassador to Israel, David Friedman, during the Trump administration. Thank you so much for taking the time, as always, to join us and break down the latest developments. Anything else you want to add about any of this before I let you go?
Yeah, I think it's important for Americans to know that the rest of the world is watching what we do. This is the most morally clear war that we've been faced with. You have a democratic ally that has full religious freedom called the State of Israel, whether it's women's rights or LGBTQ plus rights or Arab rights, Muslim rights, Christian rights. It's got all the rights. And then you have a murderous regime called Hamas that rapes, pillages, and beheads kids. And the United States of America seems to be confused in terms of which side we should be on. Anytime we are not clear on this, what do you think the rest of American allies around the world are looking at? They're saying, if you can't be clear about this, what are you going to be clear about? So Israel will figure this out. I've got all the confidence in the world. For America to recover from the damage that we've done to our international reputation is going to take a meaningful change in leadership and conviction with that leadership.
All right. Thank you again for taking the time to be here with us. We appreciate it.
Thank you, sir.